Hi, hi my friends, welcome to Deep Six, the Deep State, my daily news broadcast about the news as I see it. Boy, I hope you have your seatbelts fastened for this one. This uranium scandal is so deepening and is so ensnaring both Bill and Hillary Clinton and the FBI and the senior leadership of the Justice Department under Obama. This thing is really huge, and it just keeps going and going and going the more that's exposed. Every day, I'm amazed at how far this is going. Of course, you know the basics, which is Peter Schweitzer in his wonderful book, Clinton Cash, unveiled the fact that Bill was paid $500,000 to give a speech to Renaissance Bank, a Kremlin-controlled bank in Moscow, in 2010. And that was a few months before Hillary had to vote on whether Russia should be allowed essentially to take over a fifth of America's uranium capacity. What actually was happening was that a guy named Frank Giustra, who was Clinton's very close friend, was a mining executive in Canada, got Clinton invited to come to Kazakhstan and meet with the dictator there, who was a tremendously powerful guy, but also a horrible autocrat and a horrible human rights violator. And by meeting with him, he was doing him a big favor and giving him a big boost that he had the former president here. And in return, the head of Kazakhstan gave Giustra basically Kazakhstan's uranium deposits. Giustra then used that wealth to buy into a firm called Uranium One, which was one of the largest in the world of uranium companies. And Uranium One owned 20% of America's uranium deposits. Then Russia came in and wanted to buy Uranium One. But for that sale to be approved, because it involved uranium, it had to be approved by a committee of cabinet officials led by Hillary Clinton. And while it was under consideration by the committee, it was eventually approved, Clinton was invited to Russia and he gave the speech and he got the money. That's what we've known in the past. Now, we learn several other facts that really frame this in an amazing way. First of all, apparently, there has been a long-standing FBI investigation of Uranium One and of the Russian efforts to take over the uranium supply. And the FBI has been investigating this for 6 years. They've had undercover agents in there. They've infiltrated the organization. And they've even brought indictments and convictions. But they never made a peep about it in public during the campaign or before the campaign. And it wasn't until now, thanks to the diligent reporting of two reporters for The Hill, John Solomon and Cheryl Ann, I think, I forget her last name. And they've uncovered this FBI investigation. So even though when they're in the process of blaming Trump for coordinating with the Russians and Russian meddling in the United States elections, the FBI was investigating a long-time Russian effort to bribe officials in the Obama administration, in the Justice Department, in these various uranium companies to try to influence the sale of uranium to Russia at the same time that Bill was getting paid. A third fact emerged, which is that there was a investigation by the FBI in a scandal called the Ghost Stories. And I don't know if you've ever seen the Fox program Americans, about Russian spies who are planted in the United States and grow and live here, marry, have children, have careers, but they're really sleeper agents for the Russians, and they gradually infiltrate the defense establishment and diplomatic circles and try to rise up and become information sources. Well, that's a true story. And it's based on this story, Ghost Stories, which was an FBI investigation that began in about 2004 and ran through 2010. These are not old Soviet Union agents. These are new, young Russian spies recruited or sent over here by the Russians after the Cold War, who embedded themselves in the United States and lived lives of normal Americans. They set up an accounting firm, a tax firm, that would work on helping high-income people lower their taxes and deal with tax issues. And they had the lead agent was a Russian. I'm sorry, I'm blocking on the name, but her stage name, her adopted name in the U.S. was Cynthia Murphy. And Cynthia Murphy acquired as a client Alan Patrikoff, who was Hillary Clinton's, one of his major donors, and the chairman of her finance committee in her races for the U.S. Senate. And Cynthia infiltrated Patrikoff's firm without Patrikoff knowing who she was, and tried to use the relationship with Patrikoff had with Hillary to infiltrate Hillary's inner circle. So, and that infiltration by the Russians, which was aimed squarely at Hillary Clinton, and ultimately aimed with the goal of getting the approval of the uranium sale, was unearthed by the FBI in 2010. And coincidentally, the arrests of the 10 Russian agents took place one day before Bill spoke in Moscow at the Renaissance Bank and got the fee from the Russians of $500,000. The fourth element that's combined with all of this is that while the FBI kept silent about all this, the guy who was running the investigation was Rod Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General who just appointed Mueller as special prosecutor. Of course, the Attorney General was Eric Holder, and Holder sat on the investment committee next to Hillary that approved the uranium sale. And also overseeing the investigation were the former and current head of the FBI, Robert Mueller, during the opening years, and then James Comey. The Gang of Four. You have Rosenstein, Mueller, Comey, and Holder, all implicated in this uranium investigation, all knowing about it, all knowing about the FBI investigation into the Russian influence, and all silent during the entire general election campaign of 2016. Then there's another element on top of that. While all of this was going on, John Podesta, who was Hillary's campaign manager, his brother, Tony Podesta, was lobbying on behalf of Putin in the United States against the Magnitsky Act, and that, as we've explained, is the law that was passed to sanction individual Russians for killing Magnitsky, an investigator who had uncovered corruption in Russia. And the act passed, and Putin was determined to repeal it, and among other things, he hired Fusion, the group that did the dossier against Trump, and Tony Podesta to try to defeat it. And Podesta's brother was the key person in Hillary's operation. So there's an article that was summarized this in the Daily Caller. So here are the key facts. The FBI found that Russian intelligence had targeted Hillary Clinton before and during her time as Secretary of State. Clinton spokespersons denied that this was so. Clinton opposed the Magnitsky sanctions on officials tied to Putin. After her husband received $500,000 in Moscow from a Kremlin-connected investment bank, Hillary Clinton moved with unusual speed to whisk the ring of 10 Russian spies out of the country and back to Moscow. Hillary, as the Secretary of State, negotiated the prisoner exchange where we gave these 10 spies back to the Russians in exchange for stuff that was minor. An old communist spy from 40 years ago who was rotting away in jail, and 2 or 3 other low-level operatives. And they got them out of the country before they could be interrogated, or really interrogated in depth, and before they could be put on trial. She had the lopsided swap take place over a long summer weekend, announced on July 4th, 2010 or 11. And before the spies could stand trial, while the FBI was separately investigating Russians involved with buying Uranium-1. While that investigation was going on, she approved the sale of American uranium to Russia's nuclear weapons agencies. Principals in the sale then plowed Frank Justra $145 million into the Clinton Foundation and other projects. And Tony Podesta was lobbying for Putin at this time, and all of these events come together into what is a gigantic scandal. And it also raises the question of whether this entire investigation into Trump and Russia and collusion and meddling is not all a design to cover up the real scandal, which was Hillary's involvement with the Russians and Bill's as a result of in this uranium scandal. Now, only recently has it come to light. Well, it came to light a while ago, but nobody made the connection between these 10 Russian sleeper agents and the uranium deal. Apparently, their whole goal was to influence Hillary to get her to vote as she did in favor of the uranium deal. And nobody knew until now the FBI investigation starting in 2010 into Russian bribery to bring about the uranium deal. And nobody knew at all that the FBI had this information and that the Gang of Four, the leadership, kept that information secret and we never learned it, and then launched the investigation of Trump on the phony grounds of meddling and Russia meddling in the U.S. election. Wow.
We have lots of questions.
I'll bet we do.
I'll let you take a little break there while we... Okay, so Lorraine Blair wants to know, why do you think the mainstream media and FBI plus liberals have turned a blind eye to the Clintons, and why would they want Hillary as president if she doesn't have the best interest of the United States? Lorraine Blair wants to know.
Well, Lorraine, the establishment media has not caught up with the story yet, but there are indications that it might be. The main investigative work on this story was done by 2 reporters for The Hill, a newspaper I used to write a column for. And that's pretty much establishment. The Hill and Politico are the 2 main publications on that cover Congress. And it was featured in The Hill. And I expect that you'll begin to see stories in the rest of the mainstream media about this. I don't think this can be ignored. I think it goes to a very high level. Why they try to help Hillary Clinton? They're ideological Democrats. They deeply believe in liberalism, and they'll put up with any collateral price that entails.
And Suzanne Bugby asks, how will Fusion be forced to talk since they keep taking the Fifth?
Well, the only way to force someone to talk who takes the Fifth is to grant them immunity and to say that we're not going to prosecute you for anything you say, and that means that you can't plead the Fifth Amendment because there's no danger of incriminating yourself because we're not going to prosecute you. That hasn't happened yet. And it might never happen. We just don't know. I want to raise one other element that I forgot in my rendition. This is also kind of important. There is a guy who was the FBI informant, who was the main character in this investigation of Russian bribery in connection with the Ukrainian scandal. He's now in the FBI. And Grassley, the Republican head of the Judiciary Committee, Senate Committee, wants Sessions to let him testify. At the moment, he's subject to a gag order that was imposed earlier in the Justice Department, and he's not allowed to talk about this. His lawyer, a conservative activist named Victoria Toensing, has been pressing for him to be allowed to testify, and for the gag order to be lifted. And there's a lot of pressure on Sessions to do that. For the life of me, I can't imagine why Sessions is letting this gag order remain in place. And Toensing says that if her client is permitted to testify, he has specific information about contributions and bribes to various entities and people in the United States. Grassley, wanting him to testify, said, "Witnesses who want to talk to Congress should not be gagged and threatened with prosecution for talking. If this has happened, senior Justice Department leadership needs to fix it and release the witnesses from the gag order." There is another element that I'm afraid I also forgot to list. I mean, this just goes on. When Bill Clinton visited Russia in 2010 and spoke at the Renaissance Bank and made the $500,000, he asked the State Department for permission, State Department Hillary Clinton's secretary, for permission to meet with 15 specific Russian officials, high-ranking current and former government officials. One of them was a guy named Arkady Dvorkovich, Dvorkovich, Arkady Dvorkovich, who was on the board of Rosatom, the Russian Atomic Energy Agency, and was the key guy in Russia about this uranium situation and about the whole Russian effort to move ahead in nuclear power and nuclear technology. And Clinton asked for permission to meet with him. He was given permission, and then at the last minute, the Russians said, "You can't meet with him, but we'll let you meet with Putin instead." And Bill went into a meeting with Putin, and God knows what they talked about, and it's entirely possible that they alluded to this uranium deal, because it was right on Clinton's mind. He just was getting the $500,000 fee. 3 weeks later, his wife was voting to allow the uranium deal to go ahead. They had just arrested the spies who were infiltrating Hillary to sell this uranium deal, and Russia was embarking on a 7-year program that FBI began to investigate then to bribe officials up and down the supply chain. Wow.
Dick, we have a really great question here, and it is from Wayne Hansen. Isn't this a classic Alinsky tactic that the Clintons do to accuse your opponent of what they had done? Example, colluding with the Russians?
Yeah, who asked that?
Wayne Hansen.
Well, Wayne, you're right on target. That is exactly what I suspect is happening here. Precisely. And if so, it would indicate that the Obama people understood the massive vulnerability that they have over this issue. And this could blow everything sky high. And literally, we're talking about a cooperation between the Clintons, both of them, and the Russians to basically hijack a fifth of America's uranium deposits. This is and that dovetails with 2 detailed Russian operations to achieve the same result. One was the sleeper spies, the ghost story spies that had been infiltrating the country for many years, and the other is the concentrated effort to bribe officials to bring about this uranium sale. And it's entirely probable that the accusations against Trump are to cover their tracks in this.
Dick, Gail Maxey wants to know, what do you think about Tom Steyer trying to buy an impeachment?
Well, Tom Steyer is a quadrillionaire who funds the Democratic Party. He's just like Soros, only his bias is more toward environmentalist issues and global warming and stuff, but always as with a liberal Democrat. He probably is single-handedly responsible for the election of the current governor of Pennsylvania, whose campaign he personally financed. And he's a very dangerous character for conservatives. He may be pushing for impeachment, but, impeachment is, at the moment, a dead letter unless the Mueller investigation comes up with something new. Yep.
Dick, Danny Pinter asks, will we ever actually get to the bottom of this, or will it be swept under the proverbial rug?
Oh, we're getting to the bottom of it, all right. The media is out in front on this, generating these articles and uncovering this information. And it should be a piece of cake, because Sessions should be not only not barring the door, but holding the door open for this investigation, letting it happen. Bear in mind, this stuff is all under new management now. You have a new FBI director, Christopher Wray, W-R-A-Y, appointed by President Trump. You have a new Attorney General, Jeff Sessions. And this stuff should, and we have Republican control of Congress, so we have investigating committees, and all of this should be open and should be investigated. And it's just now coming to light, so we'll have to see if they do it, but I'm sure that at some point they will. Now, while all this is going on, there's some other news that I want to talk about a little bit. Senator Lamar Alexander of Tennessee has been negotiating a deal with Senator Murray Patty Murray of Washington State. Murray is a Democrat. Alexander is a Rhino Republican. And their deal is an effort to keep Obamacare alive by requiring that these subsidies be paid to the insurance companies who lose money in connection with Obamacare, so that essentially you make Obamacare a public utility, with the government picking up whatever deficit happens and the insurance companies being held harmless and having insured not just their investments but their profit in dealing with Obamacare cases. And the two of them negotiated this deal. There were some minor concessions that Alexander gave to Murray, but nothing major. It was basically a sellout to the Democrats. And at the moment, all 48 Democratic senators have endorsed the deal, and 12 Republicans, enough to pass it, have expressed interest in the deal. So it's not a completely dead letter, but it's not going to pass unless Trump supports it. And it poses a very interesting question for Trump. I wanted to chat with you about it. If Trump opposes this deal, it's dead. It's not going anywhere. The subsidies run out. The insurance companies pull out of Obamacare. Anybody who's holding an insurance certificate for Obamacare is holding a worthless piece of paper, because there's no insurance company that's going to be willing to write the policies. And the death spiral of Obamacare starts in January, when you have to have new enrollments to have it continue. There are 12 million people who need to renew their policies. My bet is only 8 or 9 do, maybe even less. And that's the beginning of the end, the death spiral of Obamacare. But Trump may say, yeah, but the structure will still be in law. There'll still be this mandatory thing that you have to have health insurance. There'll still be the mandate that employers have to provide health insurance. There'll still be the taxes to fund the program. There'll still be this mechanism in place. I want to repeal it and get rid of it entirely. And he may go to Murray and Alexander and say, I'll back a bill for the bailout of the insurance company in return for you eliminating the requirement that people have insurance, eliminating the requirement that employers offer insurance, and eliminating the minimum required services under Obamacare, which drive up the price. And that would be a bipartisan deal that would pass overwhelmingly in the Senate. Maybe not in the House, where conservatives may say, why are you rushing in to save Obamacare when it's dying on its own? Now, my hope is that Trump understands the logic of that and that he lets it die on its own. On the other hand, some Republicans may be saying, hey, we don't want to take the rap for Obamacare dying. If it dies because we cut off the subsidy, they'll say, sure, it died. You cut off the oxygen. You killed it. And you are responsible for the fact that 12 million people who used to have insurance now don't. Forget that many of them had insurance and had to drop it to get Obamacare because their policies were thrown out by the administration. Forget the fact that many of those had employer insurance that they got rid of to get Obamacare and all of that stuff. But the Republicans may want to avoid blame for that, and this Alexander bill may provide them with a way to do it. I'm against it, but I wanted to report it to you because I see the beginnings and glimmerings of what might be a deal here.
Well, Kathleen Janik mentions, why must we all have mediocre to bad medical care for the sake of the poor?
What's your name?
Her name is Kathleen Janik.
Hey, Kathleen. If it were for the sake of the poor, you may have a case. But the poor are already covered under Medicaid. This is for the sake of the people who are not poor. They're by definition above the poverty level, sometimes several times above the poverty level. And the whole approach of Obamacare is to dumb down medical care for all of us so that we get less medical care, a dumbed down thing, in order for everybody to get covered. Basically, they're stretching the limited numbers of doctors and nurses to cover more and more people, and they cover them more thinly. And that's why there's a huge shortage of doctors and of nurses that's threatening the whole medical industry.
Well, first of all, Dick, I just want to tell you, we have 1,600 people watching right now as we speak.
That's the most I think we've ever had.
It is. This is a record,
1,000
guys.
is our previous record.
Yeah.
Oh, my
1,200 was Friday.
Right, 1,200 is Friday. By the way, on Friday, this video, over the course of the weekend, got 170,000 views. And this one is more exciting. This one goes into the details of it all. So share this with everybody. Let's get this to really go viral.
Yeah.
It takes a lot to understand the tentacles of this scandal. There are 6 or 7 of them. There's Clinton's visit to Russia and the fees he got. There's the infiltration by the ghosts, the ghost stories of spies into the U.S. to try to infiltrate Hillary's operation. One wonders if Abedin is part of that. There's the investigation by the FBI into Russian bribery for uranium. There's the fact that the leadership of the FBI sat on this investigation and wouldn't let any of the information out. There's the fact that Tony Podesta, the brother of Hillary's campaign manager, was a lobbyist for Putin. And by the way, Mueller may be investigating Tony. First time he's ever investigated a Democrat. And he may go after him for not registering as a foreign agent. He learned about Tony Podesta through Paul Manafort. The two of them worked together, one Democrat and one Republican. But to understand all the tentacles of this, you got to really dig deep. So do share this. It took me all day to really put it together.
We have a great question from Arthur Saywitz. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. Why does Bernie keep calling health care a right?
It's the liberal rhetoric. And, you know, at some level, obviously, it is a right. Obviously, if you're dying, you should have a right to be treated by a doctor in a hospital if there's one even remotely available. But your question's an important and an interesting one. Okay, you have the right to be treated in life-saving treatment when your life is at risk, okay? Do you have the right to have a heart replacement? A cost of over maybe $500,000. Do you have a right to that? It didn't exist 10 years ago. Now it's done fairly routinely. Is that a right? Do you have a right to the latest, most expensive medication, the latest, most expensive treatment? And at what point does that right end? Do you have that right at the age of 90? And these are all very difficult questions that are hard to answer. And what Obamacare does is, under the rhetoric of making it a right, they basically stretch the resources so thin that the people that can afford it can't get that treatment. Even the people that can afford good insurance can't get that treatment, so that everybody else has access to at least some form of treatment. And that's the ultimate dilemma in healthcare.
Thomas Hillebrand asks, Dick, how can we beat the House and Senate into submission?
Well, Steve Bannon is working on that. Right now, one of the reasons I think that tax reform may well pass is that Bannon has gone around scaring to death many of, if not all, of the incumbent Republican senators by threatening to get primaries together against them. And when he got Roy Moore to defeat Luther Strange, the rhino who had been appointed to the Senate from Alabama, that really sent chills through the entire Senate. And now he's backing Kelly Ward, who I am, who is running against Jeff Flake in Arizona. He's backing Marsha Blackburn, who I'm supporting, who's running to fill the vacancy left by Corker in Tennessee. He's supporting Chris McDaniel, who I'm meeting with this week, from Mississippi who wants to run against Roger Wicker, the rhino senator from Mississippi. And by these primaries, he's scaring them to death and holding their feet to the fire in supporting the Trump program. But let me go on because there's other stuff I need to talk to you about. One matter which is easy to overlook in this is that the U.S. economy is booming. It's doing great. And it's doing great because of the pro-business, anti-regulatory attitude of the Trump administration. I think if we have a tax cut, it's going to be even better. But it's not a policy it's not a subsidy that's causing this. It's a policy. The administration's pro-business policy is freeing business to go ahead. I don't know if you saw the news today, but Trump just announced a deal with the Prime Minister of Singapore, where Singapore Airlines is going to buy a lot of planes from Boeing and create 70,000 new jobs in the United States. Previously, the deals with Boeing were with China, and it resulted in campaign contributions to the Clintons. But Trump has a new take on that. Consumer confidence is the highest it's been in years. The Dow has gained 27% since Election Day. Just the fact of the Trump election, of Trump coming in, sent such a jolt of optimism through the economy that the market went crazy. It's now over 23,000 after spending basically 2 years stuck at 16 and 17,000. Unemployment applications are down to their lowest level since 1973. Quite a record by Mr. Trump. Now, you probably read a lot of stories in the aftermath of the latest horrible hurricanes that Puerto Rico was devastated. Their entire electrical grid was knocked out. The island was destitute, and there were predictions of massive deaths in Puerto Rico. The mayor of San Juan, who is a way-over leftist, very dramatically texted Mayor Carmen Yulín Cruz, texted, "We will not be left to die. I ask the UN, UNICEF, and the world to stand with the people of Puerto Rico and stop the genocide." Genocide, killing an entire race. Well, it's been a month since the storm hit, and the death toll stands at 48. And a lot of those were people who died of heart attacks and other conditions that were storm-related because they couldn't get medical care, but might well have died anyway. 48. Some genocide, some wiping out an island, I think, with a population of 2 or 3 million people. Just very interesting to set the truth to this. Yes.
Okay, Jim Dunham wants to know: should we be worried about the close poll numbers in Alabama against Moore?
I don't think so. I think Alabama is going to be a solidly Republican state. I think you have a lot of people who voted for Strange and against Moore, and they're reluctant to come around now and support him. But I think we'll certainly hold that seat in Alabama.
1,700. Richard Moorholt Sr. says, "My daughter Michelle will be a doctor nurse practitioner in 2019. She plans to have a family practice in Utah. What would the future of healthcare be by then, do you think?"
Well, her future might be very bright because she wants to be a nurse practitioner. My niece just graduated nursing school and got her first job, and now she wants to move on and be a nurse practitioner. Increasingly in medicine, doctors are out of favor because they're so expensive, and everybody's focusing on nurse practitioners, usurping more and more of the role that doctors provided. I have a concern about that. I think doctors are very important, and they don't just mess around in those extra years of training. They learn a lot. For example, I was talking the other day to my friend who is a gastroenterologist, and he performs zillions of colonoscopies all the time. And he said that if a regular doctor, a GP, looks at a colonoscopy that he looked at, he says that the odds are about 1 in 3 that he missed some important polyps that he would see. Now, if that's what a GP does, imagine what a nurse practitioner might do. And that could be dumbing down of the service. That's not to cast any aspersions on nurse practitioners. They're vital. They're increasingly needed. It's a lucrative, wonderful career. and they're wonderful, dedicated people who serve. And I think that is likely the future.
Dick, Linda Witham asks, going back to Puerto Rico, wasn't Puerto Rico already a mess before the storm?
Yeah, Puerto Rico was a mess, but it wasn't a catastrophe. Puerto Rico had a big budget deficit. It had borrowed way beyond its abilities. You see, in Puerto Rico, there is no federal income tax. Nobody in Puerto Rico pays taxes to Washington. What happens is that the government of Puerto Rico imposes, in effect, a state tax or Commonwealth tax equal to the federal income tax. But the money stays in Puerto Rico. It doesn't go to Washington. And yet even with that, Puerto Rico could not balance its budget and was dependent on vast amounts of federal assistance. But after the storm, there was really a chance that the entire electrical power grid was wiped out, like it would be in an electromagnetic pulse. And there were serious concerns of hundreds and thousands of deaths. And the death toll turned out to be 48 because of the planning and the relief efforts of the Trump administration. Now, Thursday is going to be a very interesting day because Donald Trump is likely going to release the classified records of the Kennedy assassination that have never been released. And that's quite a step. And as you know, the conspiracy theories abound from that. And as we approach that date, I'll be talking to you more and more about the political context that existed on November 22nd, 1963, when Kennedy was shot. And just to put it in this perspective, at the very least, there was a major cover-up of the assassination. At the very least, the mob was deeply involved in the assassination, and the feds covered it up, and the Warren Commission covered it up. At the very most, there are some theories, Oliver Stone and my friend Roger Stone, no relation, one's the filmmaker, the other's a writer, say that this was done by the CIA and the FBI to stop John Kennedy from leading a reconciliation in the Cold War and elect Lyndon Johnson, who was a staunch Cold Warrior. And this was actually an action by the deep state to take out the democratically elected government. Now, that's a long leap. That's a hell of an accusation. There's nowhere near the level of proof you'd need to be able to establish it, but there's some very interesting indications, and we're eagerly awaiting this release, and I'll be covering it in some depth, unlike most of the other media.
Mm-hmm. Well, Gracie Gostella asks, will Attorney Justice ever lock up the Clintons? So tired of getting my hopes up.
Yeah, well, you got a ways to go, kiddo. What's your name?
Gracie Gostella.
Gracie, we just took power about 10 months ago. Don't get tired yet. And frankly, the evidence is only just beginning to come out. Nobody drew the connection between the uranium sale and the sleeper agents who were in the U.S. Nobody even focused on the fact that they were arrested the day before Clinton spoke at the Russian bank and got $500,000 for that. Nobody knew that the FBI was deeply investigating the sale of uranium and that there was heavy bribery stuff in the investigation. People knew that Bill Clinton had asked for a meeting with the head of Rosatom, but nobody correlated that to any of this. Let's follow the evidence and see where it goes. There's a lot more there. By the way, Jimmy Carter has indicated his willingness to go to North Korea to negotiate a solution to this. He's 93 years old, God bless him. But he's the son of a gun that caused this in the first place. I've talked about this before. Bill Clinton and Al Gore had gotten their gumption together and had finally agreed to slap permanent, deep sanctions on North Korea, and if that didn't work, to follow it up with military action. Their patience was exhausted, and they said, this is it. And then Carter flew to Korea without Clinton's approval. He didn't disapprove, but he wasn't asked. He was just notified that he's going. And there was no consultation with the State Department by Carter to understand the level of the current negotiations. And he just cut the legs out from under the administration by cutting his own deal with Kim Jong-il, Kim Jong-un's predecessor, that ultimately was enshrined in the U.S.-Korea deal that totally fell apart to stop Korea from getting nuclear weapons. And everybody knew it was a lousy deal. Everybody knew it wouldn't do anything. But when the former president had announced that he'd solved the problems, the U.S. president couldn't very well take the nation into a war when the former Democratic president said, there's no need for this. So if he's now going to go back to North Korea and screw it up again, that's not a very good idea. I hope you don't go, Mr. Carter, Mr. President.
We have a bunch of questions here. We have one from Bernie, Indiana, wants to know, was George H.W. Bush part of the CIA?
He was the head of the CIA in late 1970s under the Ford administration.
And William Brown asks, will the Kennedy information be blacked out?
No, it's going to be all over the place. I don't know if any of the stuff will be redacted to deal with current methods and agents that might be compromised, although it's been close to 60 years. But my information is that it's going to come out all over the place. Well, one hell of a day in news. First of all, let me just mention again that if anybody would like a signed book plate for Christmas to put in the book Rogue Spooks or any of my other books that you bought, please email Renee, and her address for this is
dickmorrispromos@gmail.com, and I'll post it after we close.
Oh, your name's not in?
No, I put, yeah, just it's
dickmorrispromos@gmail.com.
Yes.
Promos. And then what we'll do is we'll mail you by snail mail a signed label. And if you want me to wish somebody happy birthday or Merry Christmas, just include the information, and I'll write out their name for that. And I also want to mention the selfie of the day. This is the person that poses with Rogue Spooks, which improves anybody's appearance. The new winner today is Connie McCurdy Johnson. Thank you very, very much for your loyalty and your help. So I'll see you all tomorrow. Thanks.